Ait. For as long as most aliens could remember, humans had been the strange ones in the galaxy. Not because they were powerful or terrifying, they were neither, at least on the surface. They came from a world called Earth, a planet most other species would never survive on without heavy protection. Earth had storms that could flatten cities, animals that hunted with claws and venom, and diseases that spread faster than starlight. Scientists called it a death world, yet somehow the humans who crawled out of that chaos were gentle. They smiled often. They shared food. They fixed broken things for others without asking for anything back. On the orbital station Varel Prime, floating between 3 star systems, Kyle adjusted his collar and stepped onto the polished floor of the Galactic Concord assembly chamber. He was not a soldier or a warlord. He was a diplomat, one of the few humans trusted enough to speak in this room. Around him sat representatives from 23 species, scaled, feathered, crystalline, and many forms in between. They watched him with eyes that held everything from curiosity to boredom. Kyle cleared his throat. "Thank you for hearing me again," he said, his voice calm. "The proposal before you is simple. Joint teams, human and non-human, will restore the soil and water systems on the planet Corin 9. The war there ended 5 years ago, but the land is still poisoned. Crops won't grow. Children are getting sick. We can fix it. We've done it before." He gestured to the hologram behind him. It showed green fields, clean rivers, and smiling faces, human and alien alike, working side by side. It was real footage from another world, repaired years ago with human help. Lena stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, watching. She was Kyle's aide, but she was also his eyes. She saw the way the Cathari delegate flicked his tail in annoyance. She saw the Xenari's light diffusion panels dim slightly, a sign of disinterest. Only the Mer, insect-like and quiet, kept their compound eyes fixed on Kyle without blinking. When the vote began, it moved fast. The Cathari voted no without speaking. The Xenari abstained. The Mer hesitated, then also voted no. Only 2 minor species, both who had received human aid in the past, voted yes. The motion failed. Kyle didn't sigh. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, turned off the hologram, and walked out. Lena followed, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Outside the chamber, in the quiet corridor that overlooked the stars, Kyle leaned against the railing. "They don't even pretend to care anymore," he said quietly. "They never did," Lena replied. "They just liked getting things for free. Back on Earth, people didn't know about this vote. They were busy living, farming, teaching, building, healing. Humans had long ago stopped trying to prove they belonged in the galaxy. They just showed up, helped where they could, and went home. But somewhere in the upper levels of Sol Command, deep beneath the surface of Mars, a different kind of meeting was happening. Admiral Cole, a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes, reviewed the latest reports. Human-built atmospheric processors on 3 alien worlds had been ignored for maintenance requests. Medical shipments had been delayed because local officials demanded gifts before allowing landing clearance. And now another peace proposal had been rejected. She tapped a key on her console. A secure channel opened. "Send it," she said. Across the system, hidden in plain sight, dormant protocols stirred. Not weapons, not yet. Just small changes. A delay here. A lockout there. Nothing obvious. Nothing violent. Just the first quiet step in a plan no one outside Earth's inner circle knew about. On Varel Prime, Kyle and Lena boarded their shuttle back to the human sector. The ride was silent. As the stars stretched into lines outside the viewport, Lena finally spoke. "Do you think they'll notice?" "Not until it's too late," Kyle said. He was right. For weeks, nothing seemed to change. Humans still smiled at alien children in the market. They still translated emergency broadcasts into 50 languages. They still sent repair bots to fix damaged freighters, even those that belonged to species who had voted against them. But something had shifted. The kindness was still there, but it was no longer endless. It had a limit now, a line. On a dusty colony world near the edge of human space, a young man named Danny worked on an atmospheric stabilizer. It was old, built by humans decades ago, but it kept the air breathable for the local settlers, most of whom were not human. He wiped sweat from his brow and checked the readout. Everything looked fine, but deep in the machine's code, a new instruction had been added during the last automatic update. It said, If maintenance request denied 3 times, enter standby mode. Danny didn't know that. No one told him. He just kept working, believing the system would keep running forever like it always had. Back on Earth, in a small town in Oregon, a girl named Mia sat on her porch with her dog. She was reading a book about stars and aliens. Her mother, once a translator for the Concorde, now grew vegetables in their backyard. She hadn't taken a translation job in over a year. "Why'd you stop?" Mia had asked once. "Because words only matter if someone listens," her mother had said. That night, Kyle sent a message. Just 3 words, phase 1 complete. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. The message traveled through secure channels, bounced off satellites, and reached Sol Command in under 2 seconds. There it was logged, confirmed, and filed. No alarm sounded. No ships launched. But somewhere, in the quiet hum of servers and the silent spin of orbital platforms, the galaxy began to change. The humans hadn't raised their voices. They hadn't fired a single shot. They had simply stopped holding everything together with their bare hands, and no one noticed because no one was paying attention. They would soon. Part 2. Weeks passed after the failed vote on Varel Prime, and the galaxy kept turning as if nothing had changed. Trade ships moved between stars. Markets buzzed with alien voices. Children played in the shadow of spaceports. But something was different. Humans were still there, but they were quieter now. They didn't offer help unless asked twice. They didn't stay late to fix broken comms. They didn't smile as much. At first, no one noticed. The Kethari assumed humans were just busy. The Zinari thought it was a temporary system glitch. The mirror said nothing, as always. But then the silence grew louder. Human freighters stopped docking at ports that had refused aid requests. When a Kethari cargo master demanded to know why his usual supply of nutrient paste hadn't arrived, the human dispatcher simply said, "Your account is under review." No explanation, no anger, just a pause that stretched into days. On Research Station Theta 7, a joint lab orbiting a dead moon, human scientists packed their gear and left without ceremony. They took their data cores, their medical kits, and their personal items. They left behind the fusion stabilizer they'd maintained for 10 years. When the Zinari lead researcher tried to restart it, the system refused to recognize his biometric signature. A message flashed on the screen. Maintenance access restricted. Contact Earth Central for reauthorization. He never got a reply. Farther out, on the ice moon of Harsis 7, Danny wiped frost from his goggles and stared at the readout panel on the atmospheric stabilizer. The numbers made no sense. Oxygen levels were dropping. Temperature controls were offline. He tried to reboot the system manually, but every command came back with an error. Access denied. He called for help. First to the local colony office, then to the regional hub. Finally, he sent a priority. Distress signal to Earth Central Communications, the same office that had built and maintained these systems for over 60 years. The reply came 3 hours later. Just one line. Pending review. Danny read it 3 times. He didn't understand. Review of what? The moon's air was failing. People were coughing. Children had started fainting in school. He sent another message, more urgent this time. Again, the same reply. He wasn't the only one. Across the outer systems, similar reports trickled in. Human-built water purifiers on desert worlds shut down. Gravity regulators on asteroid habitats went silent. Medical drones in refugee camps powered off mid-cycle. None of it was sabotage. Nothing exploded, nothing was broken. It was all just turned off. And Earth said nothing. On Mars orbital, Lena sat in a small monitoring room filled with soft blue light. Screens lined the walls, each showing a different distress call from a non-human world. Some were angry, some were pleading. One Kethari official even threatened to seize human assets by force. Lena didn't react. She logged each message, tagged it, and forwarded it to command. Her fingers moved fast, steady. She didn't feel guilt. She remembered her childhood on Earth, how her school had practiced emergency drills for earthquakes, floods, and disease outbreaks, how her father had taught her to purify water with nothing but sunlight and plastic. Humans didn't survive their world by being soft. They survived by being smart, tough, and ready. Kindness, she thought, was a gift, not a duty. Back on Earth, in a quiet neighborhood in Colorado, a man named Rick watered his tomato plants. He had spent the last 20 years on the desert world of Orland 4, teaching native farmers how to grow crops in dry soil. He'd built wells, he'd shared seeds, he'd stayed through sandstorms and droughts. And for what? Last month, the local warlords had demanded he hand over his irrigation schematics for the greater good. When he asked for a signed agreement, they laughed. He left the next day. Now his hands were in real dirt, not synthetic regolith. His tomatoes were small but red. His dog barked at a squirrel. Life was simple again. On Varel Prime, the Conquered held another meeting. This time, the mood was tense. The Cathari accused humans of economic warfare. The Xenari suggested a system-wide virus had corrupted human networks. The Mir remained silent, but their antennae twitched, a sign of deep concern. Kyle stood before them again, calm as ever. "We are not attacking anyone," he said. "Our systems are undergoing routine updates. Some compatibility issues may arise. We recommend local authorities develop independent infrastructure." It was the closest he'd come to saying, "You're on your own." The room erupted. Voices clashed in a dozen languages. Kyle didn't raise his voice. He just waited until the noise faded, then walked out. That night, in a dimly lit bar near the docking bays, a young Mir technician whispered to a human, "Freighter pilot, is it true? Are you leaving us?" The pilot, a woman named Carol, sipped her drink. "We never owned you," she said. "We just helped. There's a difference." Carol had flown supply runs for 15 years. She'd delivered medicine to plague zones, food to blockaded planets, and spare parts to dying stations. She'd never asked for thanks, but she'd expected respect. Instead, she got demands. Now her ship carried only human cargo. Her routes were shorter, her sleep was deeper. On Harsis 7, Danny stood outside the stabilizer dome, breath fogging in the thinning air. He looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was watching. He thought about Earth. Green, wet, dangerous, alive. He'd never been there, but he'd heard stories. Stories of people who fought floods with sandbags, who walked miles for clean water, who buried friends lost to fever but kept planting seeds the next spring. Maybe that was the problem, he realized. The rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to survive without help. And humans had spent so long giving that they'd forgotten how to say no. But not anymore. In a secure bunker beneath the surface of Luna, Admiral Cole reviewed the latest status report. Phase 2 was proceeding as planned. No violence, no declarations, just withdrawal, just silence. She closed the file and looked out the viewport at Earth, hanging in the black like a blue jewel. She thought of her granddaughter who wanted to be a teacher. She hoped the girl would never have to live in a galaxy that took kindness for weakness. On Mars Orbital, Lena received a new message. It was from Sol Command. One word: continue. She nodded and turned back to the screens. The calls kept coming. She kept logging them and Earth kept quiet. Part 3. The Cathari had always believed strength was the only language the galaxy understood. They respected power, not patience. So when human aid stopped coming, they didn't beg. They didn't negotiate. They decided to take. Their war council met in a chamber deep inside their flagship, the Iron Maw. Generals with scarred scales and sharp teeth pored over star charts. Their target was clear: the human hydroponic megaplatforms near Proxima Centauri. These floating gardens could feed 10 billion beings for a year. Humans had shared their harvest freely during famines, even with species that had insulted them. Now the Cathari saw no reason to ask. "We go in fast," said Commander Vrak, his voice like grinding stone. "Board the platforms. Disable defenses. Claim them as reparations for broken trust. The humans won't fight. They never do." The fleet launched 3 days later, 12 warships, 2 troop carriers, and a command vessel. They moved with confidence, their engines burning bright against the dark. What they didn't know was that the platforms had changed. When the Cathari boarding pod slammed into the outer hulls, their soldiers cut through the airlocks with plasma torches. Inside, they found empty corridors. No guards, no alarms, just silence and the hum of distant machinery. They moved deeper, expecting resistance, but found nothing. Even the control rooms were vacant. Then the doors sealed behind them, lights flickered. Gravity shifted, atmosphere began to vent. Emergency protocols, rewritten weeks earlier, activated without warning. The system scanned biometrics. Human signatures were allowed to pass. All others were locked out, isolated and slowly suffocated. On the command ship, Vrak watched in horror as his squad stopped responding. Life signs vanished one by one. He ordered a retreat, but the platform's defense grid, dormant for decades, woke up. Not with lasers or missiles, but with precision. Automated turrets targeted only non-human ships. Kinetic barriers flared to life, blocking escape routes. Drones swarmed the hulls, welding hatches shut from the outside. In 17 minutes, 11 Cathari ships were disabled. One barely escaped, its hull cracked, its crew half dead. The captain who returned babbled about ghosts in the walls and machines that remembered every face that had ever lied to a human. News spread fast. The conquered was stunned. The Zainari demanded answers. The Mir sent quiet observers to study the platforms from a distance. No one boarded again. Meanwhile, on the desert world of Orlan 4, Rick loaded the last crate onto his rover. He'd stayed longer than he needed to, hoping the local leaders would come to their senses. They hadn't. Instead, they sent armed enforcers to his farm, demanding he stay and do his duty to the people. Rick stood in the dust, his hat pulled low over his eyes. "I did my duty," he said. "For 22 years. I taught you how to dig wells. I showed you which seeds grow in dry soil. I stayed through 3 droughts. Now it's your turn to figure it out." The enforcers raised their weapons. Rick didn't flinch. He just climbed into his rover and drove away. Behind him, the irrigation pumps he'd maintained for decades fell silent. Within weeks, the wells dried up. Crops withered. The people who had once laughed at his requests for basic respect now stood in lines for water that never came. On Harsis 7, Danny gave up trying to fix the stabilizer. He gathered his family and left on the last shuttle out. As the moon shrank behind them, he looked at his daughter, asleep in her seat, and wondered if she'd ever understand why they had to leave. Back on Earth, life went on. Children went to school. Farmers harvested wheat. Doctors treated patients. But something had shifted in the air. People spoke less about helping others and more about protecting their own. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. They had given everything they could. Now, they would keep what was theirs. In a small town in Iowa, a woman named Carol, the freighter pilot, visited her parents. She sat on their porch drinking sweet tea and told them about the Mir technician who had asked if humans were leaving the galaxy. "Are we?" her father asked. "No," she said. "We're just done being used." On Mars orbital, Lena watched the Cathari retreat on her screen. She felt no joy, only relief. The message from Sol Command came an hour later. Phase 3 confirmed. She forwarded it without comment. Across human space, settlers began packing. Not all of them, only those on worlds that had taken without gratitude, that had mocked human kindness as weakness. They left quietly, taking their tools, their knowledge, and their goodwill with them. On a jungle moon near Sirius, a human botanist named Joel removed the last of his seed banks from the research greenhouse. The Native Council had demanded he hand over all genetic data for public use. When he asked for a formal agreement, they accused him of hoarding. He left the greenhouse empty. The plants inside would die without his care. The council would learn too late that some knowledge couldn't be copied. It had to be lived. Back on Earth, Mia, the girl from Oregon, asked her mother why the stars look different lately. "They don't," her mother said. "But the way we look at them does." In classrooms, teachers began telling new stories. Not just about sharing and peace, but about boundaries. About saying no. About the fact that Earth's history wasn't just of kindness, it was of survival. Of people who rebuilt after fires, who fought plagues with soap and willpower, who stood in floodwaters to save neighbors they barely knew. That kind of strength didn't roar. It waited. And when it moved, it didn't ask permission. The galaxy was learning that now. On the edge of human territory, Automated defense grids powered up for the first time in 50 years. Not to attack, just to watch, to be ready, because the Deathworlders had stopped being kind and no one knew what came next. Art 4. The Concord called an emergency session, but no one knew what to say. The Cathari were humiliated. The Zenari were confused. The Mer stayed silent, but even they shifted in their seats. Humans had not fired on anyone. They had not declared war. They had simply stopped helping and defended what was theirs. That was worse than an attack. It was a mirror. Admiral Cole watched the broadcast from her office on Luna. She saw the fear in the eyes of species that had spent centuries treating human generosity as a right. She felt no satisfaction, only weariness. This was not what Earth wanted, but it was what the galaxy had forced. On the fringe of human space near the asteroid belt of Epsilon Eridani, a new fleet gathered. It was not just Cathari this time. 2 Zenari warships joined them, their crystalline hulls shimmering with cold light. Mercenary syndicates from the Outer Rim signed on, lured by promises of human tech and easy victory. They called it the Unity Fleet. Their goal was simple: break through human defenses, seize key infrastructure, and force Earth back into line. "They think we're bluffing," said Commander Vrak, his voice rough from oxygen sickness. He had survived the platform disaster, but his pride had not. "They think we'll back down if they show teeth. But humans have no teeth." He was wrong. The fleet jumped into human space without warning. Their first target was Luna shipyards, the heart of human orbital construction. From there they planned to move on Mars, then Earth itself. They expected resistance, but not much. After all, humans had never fought a real war in over a century. What they found was not a defense fleet. It was a wall. Thousands of drones, small and silent, swarmed from hidden bays in the moon's surface. Autonomous war platforms, dormant for decades, powered on with a hum that vibrated through space itself. Kinetic rods stored in lunar orbit for mining operations were repurposed in seconds. Their trajectories shifted. Their targets locked. No human voices gave orders. No ships broadcast warnings. The system acted on its own, guided by protocols written long ago, updated in secret, and now fully awake. The first Cathari ship exploded before it even cleared the jump point. A kinetic rod moving at orbital velocity punched through its core like paper. The Zenari vessels tried to scatter, but drones intercepted them with surgical precision, targeting engines, not crews. The mercenaries panicked. Some turned to flee. Others fired blindly into the dark. It did not matter. In 17 minutes, 83 ships were disabled or destroyed. Not a single human pilot had left the surface of the moon. Not a single human life was lost. Back on Earth, in a quiet town in Oregon, Mia sat on her porch with her dog. She had heard the news, everyone had. Her school had been canceled for the day. Adults spoke in low voices. But Mia wasn't scared. She watched the sky and thought about her grandfather, who used to tell stories about storms that lasted for weeks and how people shared food until the sun came back. She went inside and made herself a sandwich. On Mars orbital, Lena reviewed the battle logs. No mistakes, no excess. Every action had been defensive, proportional, and precise. The system had not chased fleeing ships. It had not attacked civilian vessels. It had simply protected human space. She sent a single message to Sol Command: perimeter secure. Admiral Cole read it and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened a new channel. "Send the recall order," she said. "All non-essential personnel return to Earth or Mars. Civilian ships stay in port for 48 hours. It was not a threat. It was a warning. On Orlan 4, the warlords who had driven Rick away now faced riots. Their people were hungry. Their wells were dry. They sent desperate messages to Earth, begging for help. The replies were the same as before. Pending review. They did not understand. They thought humans would eventually feel sorry for them. They did not realize that pity had run out. In a refugee camp on the border of Zenari space, a human doctor named Carol packed her medical kit. She had stayed longer than she should have, treating burns and broken bones from the recent border clashes. But when Zenari officers demanded she hand over her trauma nanites for strategic use, she knew it was time to go. She left the camp at dawn. Behind her, the clinic's power cell shut down automatically. The lights went out. The water purifier stopped. The people inside cried out, but Carol did not look back. She had healed hundreds. She owed them nothing. On Earth, schools held special lessons, not about war but about history. Children learned how their ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and world wars, not by waiting for saviors but by standing together. They learned that kindness was powerful, but only when it was chosen, not demanded. In Colorado, Rick stood in his backyard, watching rain fall on his tomato plants. He thought about Orlan 4. He hoped someone there would learn to dig their own wells. On Varel Prime, the Concord met again. This time, no one shouted. The Cathari delegation sat in silence. The Zenari emitted a low, mournful tone, a sign of regret. The Mer finally spoke. The humans did not change, their translator said. We did. We forgot that kindness is not weakness. It is strength that chooses not to strike. No one argued. Back on Luna, Admiral Cole received a message from the Unity Fleet's surviving commander. It was a surrender request. She read it, then forwarded it to Earth Central with one note. Let them wait. She walked to the observation deck and looked at Earth. Blue, green, alive. She thought of her granddaughter, who wanted to be a teacher. She hoped the girl would grow up in a galaxy that understood the difference between giving and being taken from. In a small monitoring room on Mars orbital, Lena watched the stars. The calls for help had stopped. The threats had ended. The silence now was different. It was not empty. It was respectful, and for the first time in a long time it felt like peace. Years passed and the galaxy changed, not all at once but slowly like a river carving a new path. Humans were still there, trading, talking, traveling. But things were different now. They no longer gave everything away. They asked for fair terms. They protected their own, and the rest of the galaxy learned to listen. Trade resumed, but only with those who had shown respect. The Mer were first. They sent formal letters of apology, not with grand words, but with actions, returning stolen human tech, sharing clean energy designs, and standing silent when others spoke ill of Earth. Humans welcomed them back, not with open arms, but with open doors. That was enough. The Cathari took longer. Their pride was deep like old stone, but hunger humbled them. After their failed attack and the loss of their fleet, their people suffered. Crops failed without human soil treatments. Their young got sick without human vaccines. At last, their elders came to Earth, not in warships but in unarmed shuttles. They asked for help not as a right but as a request. Humans agreed, but with contracts, clear terms, and shared responsibility. The Cathari signed without complaint. On the desert world of Orlan 4, a new generation rose. They had grown up in dust and thirst, hearing stories of the man named Rick, who once made water flow from dry ground. They dug their own wells now. They saved seeds. They taught their children to fix broken pumps. When a human trader visited years later, they offered him tea and asked for advice. Not demands, just questions. He stayed for 3 days and left them with better filters. It was a fair trade. In taverns across 1,000 worlds, aliens began telling new stories, not about human weakness, but about the day the Deathworlders stopped being kind. The Cathari warriors tattooed human silhouettes on their arms, not as enemies, but as reminders that even the gentlest hand can close into a fist. The Zenari composed quiet symphonies about silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. The Mer told their young, never mistake patience for permission. Back on Earth, life went on. Children played in parks. Farmers harvested wheat. Doctors healed the sick. But the lessons remained. Schools taught not just science and math, but boundaries. Not just history, but honesty. People remembered that their ancestors survived not because the world was kind, but because they were strong enough to be kind on their own terms. In Oregon, Mia was no longer a child. She studied xenobotany at university, learning how to grow food in alien soils. Her dog was old now, gray around the muzzle, but still wagged his tail when she came home. She sometimes spoke at local schools, telling students about the Great Withdrawal, not as a warning, but as a lesson. Kindness is a choice, she would say, and choices mean nothing if you can't say no. On Mars orbital, Lena had retired. She lived in a small house near the edge of a canyon, where the red dust met the sky. She grew tomatoes in a sealed greenhouse and read old messages from her time in service. She never regretted what they had done. She only hoped it would never be needed again. Admiral Cole had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. Her granddaughter became a teacher, just as she'd hoped. In her classroom, she hung a simple sign, Help those who help themselves. Human ships still flew between stars, but they carried more than supplies now. They carried understanding. When they docked at alien ports, they asked what was needed and what could be offered in return. Trade was fair. Aid was earned. Peace was mutual. The old days of endless giving were gone. Not because humans had become cold, but because they had finally been seen. Not as saints, not as servants, but as equals. On the ice moon of Harses 7, the atmospheric stabilizer still stood, dark and silent. But nearby, a new colony had risen, built by locals, powered by local hands. They had learned to manage their own air, their own water. When a human engineer visited to inspect old infrastructure, they showed him their systems with pride. He nodded, gave a few suggestions, and left. No one begged. No one demanded. They simply shared knowledge like neighbors should. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, the tales grew richer. Elders told their young how the humans once held the stars together with goodwill alone, how they fed the hungry, healed the sick, and mended broken worlds without asking for thanks, and how, when the galaxy took that kindness for granted, the humans simply stepped back and let the galaxy feel the weight of its own choices. It was not a story of revenge. It was a story of balance. On Earth, in a small town in Colorado, Rick sat on his porch watching the sunset. His tomatoes were ripe. His dog slept at his feet. He thought about Orlan 4 sometimes, but not with anger, just with hope. He hoped they were okay. He hoped they remembered. And somewhere in the hum of 1,000 ships and the rustle of 1,000,000 leaves, the galaxy moved forward. Not perfect, but wiser. Because every species still tells tales about the day Deathworlders decided to stop being kind.